right, happy Thursday. Today is May 30th, 2024, and welcome to 2024 Creating Our Shared Future Town Hall Series, where we will be taking a deep dive into Project 2025 and the implications for our democracy. My name is Abeni Bloodworth, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Chromatic Black, and we are proud to join the Center for Popular Democracy, the Global Center for Climate Justice, the Center for Oil and Gas Organizing, Hip Hop Caucus, We Matter, 8 Mile Community Association, and Greenpeace, as we unpack the impact to climate and environmental justice. Given today's decision by the New York jury to convict Donald Trump, a former sitting president, of 34 counts of criminal charges, and his post-verdict statement that the real verdict is going to be November 5th, by the people, we are reminded of the critical importance of safeguarding our democracy, our institutions, and our values. Before we get started, we would please ask everyone to please take out their phone right now. What we know is that climate justice is a big topic, and it's going to require not only tonight, but us coming back on September 12th to dive even deeper. So we encourage you to take a look at that QR code and scan and register. We've also put together a virtual swag bag, which houses our town hall recordings, resources, fun facts, and some nifty tools. Please visit us. We'll drop the link. It's info.chromaticblack.org /2024 and beyond town hall. We ask that you like, follow, share with family and friends. And if you didn't catch all of that, we dropped the links in the chat. Again, thank you for joining us, and let's get started. I have the honor of welcoming tonight's event moderator, Carrie Fulton. When we thought about who was the perfect, most audacious, informed, passionate, committed moderator that we could find, we thought about Carrie. She is a distinguished advocate, organizer, educator, policy advisor with over 15 years of experience in environmental and climate justice. She has collaborated with local, national, and international coalitions, orchestrating impactful campaigns, leadership programs, and conventions. Her work has been featured in media outlets like BT, Teen Vogue, C-SPAN, and CGTN as the Senior Organizing Director at the Center for Oil and Gas Organizing. She leads initiatives to enhance community engagement with federal agencies, focusing on the hazards of LNG exports in the U.S. Everyone, please welcome our good friend, Carrie Fulton. Hi, Carrie.
Thank you. Hi. Can you all hear me okay? Wonderful. Well, thank you, Abeni, for that wonderful introduction. It is a big day today in history, and we're talking about something super big as well. So I'm just really excited. Again, my name is Carrie Fulton, and I'm pleased to moderate today's panel, which I know in Town Hall on Project 2025, and the real destructive impact that it could have on climate and environmental policy, and so much is happening. So we're really excited to get into that. Before we do, we have a quick moment to set the stage for today's conversation, and that's going to be words from a huge congressional hero on these and champion on these issues, and that's Senator Ed Markey. So without further ado, let's hear what he has to say. And thank you for joining us all the way from his home state of Massachusetts.
Good evening. I'm Senator Ed Markey, and I'm honored to join you today to talk about the importance of fighting for climate justice and against efforts to attack our chance at a just and livable future. Much like climate change is eroding our coast, shadowy groups like the Heritage Foundation are attempting to erode our democracy. And these far-right groups will stop at nothing in their quest to unravel, undermine, and undo our decades of progress. The Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 is a concerted effort to, quote, deconstruct the administrative state. That means destruction of our laws and regulations to protect clean water, clean air, and a healthy planet. That means destruction of our laws to hold polluters responsible for their toxic action. That means destruction of the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, and the destruction of our hard-won historic levels of funding to build clean economies that work for everyone, not just the wealthy few. And also on the chopping block for the Heritage Foundation, and they laid it out for us. They're telling us what they're going to do: destroy the EPA's Office of Public Engagement, the EPA's Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights, EPA's Office of Enforcement, and so much more. Under the Heritage Foundation Project 2025, EPA would have to hand over the reins to states, creating a patchwork system that would sacrifice the well-being of Black, Brown, Indigenous, and low-income communities to polluting and profiteering. EPA would actually stand for every polluter's ally. We fought hard and we won historic investments in environmental justice and a clean energy future. We can't let it all be taken away by these right-wing enemies. We must protect our progress, defeat the anti-democratic agenda, and fight for our future. I thank all of you for your inspirational efforts and look forward to continuing to be your partner in this historic fight to protect our environment against right-wing extremists. Thank you all for all that you are doing.
We are so thankful that we have that vote of confidence from one of our fearless leaders, Senator Ed Markey, and we thank him for his time. And now we're going to hear from Daniel Faber, who is the co-founder of the Global Center for Climate Justice. And he's going to offer a background and some framing for today's discussion on Project 2025. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Carrie. It's my pleasure to be here. And I'm waiting for the PowerPoint to come up. So as Carrie said, I'm Daniel Faber. I'm the Senior Research Fellow at the Global Center for Climate Justice. And as she says, I've been tasked with providing you a brief overview of Project 2025 and its impacts on the environmental and climate justice movements going forward. And as Senator Markey just said, Project 2025 is more than just a white paper, and that is reiterated by Paul Dance, who is the director of Project 2025. We should understand that this is a mobilization by the entire right wing to deconstruct the administrative state, which, as Senator Markey says, is the destruction of the human and environmental welfare state as we know it. And so what we want to talk about then, and very briefly, is to provide you an overview of what is Project 2025, which will be elaborated on by the speakers that follow. And essentially, it's a comprehensive roadmap for the second Trump presidency, but also the entire conservative movement going forward. And a big part of this is the 920-page manifesto, Mandate for Leadership, that calls for the systematic dismantling of decades of progress related to environmental justice, climate change, and the protection of the environment. When I read this, it reads like some dystopian strategic playbook on how they intend to destroy the functioning of the federal government, or what they call the administrative state and the deep state. And it reads like a declaration of war on our attempts to build a genuine multiracial democracy in the United States. It's a declaration on war on our rights as citizens to live in a healthy and clean environment. It reads as a declaration of war, in effect, on all the progressive causes that we care about. So there are four major components to Project 2025. And the first is the mandate for leadership, this report, which outlines their plan for greatly expanding presidential power and the power of the executive branch over the entire federal government, and for both simultaneously weaponizing and dismantling parts of the federal bureaucracy and government in ways that suit the interest of major corporate polluters. The second part, which we're not going to talk so much about tonight, but is still incredibly important, is a strategy they developed for populating the government with what they call conservative warriors that are hostile to social and environmental justice concerns. The plan is to strip the federal government of some 50,000 career civil servants and replace them with party loyalists or these conservative warriors. One of the great lessons they learned when Trump came in his first term was that often he issued orders, many of which were illegal, that the federal bureaucracy refused to carry out because they were seen as illegal or violations of ethics. So they learned their lesson, and their plan is to have a wholesale replacement of these civil servants within the federal government. The third part of this then is to provide for their training or indoctrination, if you will, once they are placed in positions of power in the federal government, to carry out their anti-environmental, anti-social justice agenda. And the fourth part of this Project 2025 is the development of a playbook of actions that would be taken in the first 180 days of the new administration. These are the concrete tactics and strategies that they would be pursuing on day one. As Trump says, he would be a dictator for one day. And on day one, these are the strategies and tactics that they would begin implementing right away for the takeover and dismantling of key agencies and so forth. This isn't as public for obvious reasons and isn't as well developed, but it's also just as fundamental to Project 2025 as a mandate for leadership. So why is Project 2025 so different, and why does it pose such a threat? I first started writing about mandate for leadership when Reagan was elected in 1980, and Reagan, when he came in, implemented some 65% of the policy proposals that were proposed by the Heritage Foundation at this time, but it was largely a project of the Heritage Foundation. Since that time, we've seen the development of a very sophisticated infrastructure of think tanks and policy institutes. Some are single issue, multi-issue, but there are think tanks and policy institutes and research centers, foundations, and so forth that are committed to carrying out an anti-environmental justice, anti-climate change agenda. We term this the polluter industrial complex. It's some 128 different organizations with a total income of over $800 million a year that come from major corporate polluters, with the oil and gas industry standing at the top of the list. And they've been promoting climate denialism, which it turns out to be one of the most well-funded corporate propaganda campaigns ever instituted in the history of the world. And so the Heritage Foundation is one of the most influential and most powerful of these right-wing think tanks. And they are also the ones that are closest to the centers of power, both on the right and the Republican Party and with the Trump administration. We just conducted a new report at the Global Center for Climate Justice called Voter Suppression, Climate Justice, and Polluter Industrial Complex. And it turns out that Heritage has been at the center of the attack on voting rights and voter suppression efforts aimed at youth, but particularly communities of color all over the country. And this has received massive backing from major corporate polluters like the oil and gas industry that want to restrict the voting access in these communities because they are some of the most pro-environment, pro-climate change, pro-environmental justice communities in the United States. And so Project 2025 was launched in April 2022 under the leadership of the Heritage Foundation. But what's different about this time is there are some 100 different organizations and institutions, including a who's who of prominent right-wing actors and many Trump operatives who were in power in the last administration, that have really come together for the first time to develop this broad-based manifesto. So it For the first time, we see the virtual entirety of the conservative movement and the polluter industrial complex coming together, arriving at a consensus and putting the full weight of their wealth and financial resources and political clout behind this new vision for seizing control of the state. So what we're going to be doing tonight is going over what does this mean for the future of the environmental justice movement and the climate change movement and the planet. And I think one of the things that will become obvious to us as we get into this, we'll see that if this is implemented by the Trump administration, Project 2025 would prove catastrophic for the planet. It's going to serve to deepen the national and global ecological crisis, and it's going to escalate the impacts of pollution and climate change in frontline communities, especially lower income communities of color and working class communities. So this is our moment to become mobilized and to begin to prepare ourselves for the fight to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. That was so key and so critical. And now we have Folabi, who's coming from the Democracy Campaign Director. He's from Greenpeace. And so this is key as we talk about this, not only just from a domestic US perspective, but also from an international perspective. So thank you for joining us.
Hi, all. My name is Folabi Olagbaju. I use him pronouns. Currently coming to you from the unceded Nakotank and Piscataway land, otherwise known as Silver Spring. I'm the Democracy Campaign Director with Greenpeace. For some of you may know, Greenpeace is a global organization that uses research, cutting-edge research, creative communications, and sometimes non-violent direct action to expose environmental injustices and environmental problems around the world and to offer and promote solutions that are really essential for a peaceful, greener, and more just planet that we all need. The campaign, Greenpeace campaigns on democracy because we believe very strongly that a functional, people-powered democracy is truly essential for climate solution goals. This is the only reason that Greenpeace works on democracy. Our democracy campaign has 3 buckets of work. The first, of course, is clean up our democracy, passing federal voting rights legislation like the Freedom to Vote Act or the John Lewis Voting Rights Reauthorization Act. We also work to promote the right to protest. As you know, Greenpeace uses protest as part of our mission. And as many of the audience here also will know, there's been a proliferation of anti-protest bills that are largely promoted by the American Legislative Council, ALEC, in many states since the George Floyd days of reckoning. We've had literally hundreds, more than 200 anti-protest bills that have been introduced, and some of them passed across the states. The third bucket that we work on is the right to dissent. Greenpeace knows a lot about corporations, corporate polluters trying to deny us our Fourth Amendment rights of free speech and to be in solidarity with one another. We are currently facing a $300 million lawsuit by Energy Transfer, the company that is behind the Dakota Access Pipeline, alleging that everything that happened at Standing Rock in 2016 was orchestrated by Greenpeace, which itself is a racist allegation, because we all know that that Standing Rock protest was led by indigenous youth. In terms of the Project 25, just following Daniel, it's a comprehensive transition plan put together by Heritage Foundation for a possible Trump second presidency. Steve Bannon called it a blueprint, a governing manifesto for MAGA agenda from day one of Trump's second presidency. It has a total of about 180 playbooks that Daniel just covered in his opening presentation there. It's also supported by other climate denying organizations like the Atlant Institute and the Institute for Energy Research. I think most of the threats within Project 25 will probably come within the administrative procedures than anything in terms of major climate legislation. As many of the audience here will know, it's very important to remember that no major climate legislations has passed the US Congress in a while. During the two terms of Obama, none came to pass. Trump's first presidency didn't pass. Biden's Inflation Reduction Act is the exemption. It's actually the biggest one that has passed in recent memory. So I think the administrative procedure is where we're going to likely to see most of the actions that are contained within Project 2050. It's also very important to also remember that Trump does not have a very strong position on climate as he does on immigration. We all know his position on immigration. He made that very clear from day one. So it will also most likely farm out whatever it's going to be doing with EPA to some major campaign donors in the same format like we had during his first presidency when he appointed Scott Pruitt, who, as we know, thought that his job as the EPA administrator was to increase pollution rather than decreasing it, until the court told him, no, you can't do that. We also know that Trump is very transactional in his approach to relationship building. We heard about the Mar-a-Lago dinner with the American Petroleum Institution and the fossil fuel barons who came there, where Trump basically solicited a $1 billion bribe and in return to do whatever the corporate polluters want to do. They can pollute as much as they want, promising to roll back many of the Biden era regulations, so we know what he's trying to do. It's also interesting that the oil and gas lobby attacked Biden climate policy, even when he himself is today overseeing the biggest oil boom in record history. US is now being called the Saudi Arabia of fossil fuel in terms of oil and gas. So I just think that is where we are now. This is this Project 25 is really will have a catastrophic impact on all the advances that we made during the Obama years going into the Biden years. Check.
Thank you so much for that. That is such a critical conversation, and I'm sending all the grace to Greenpeace, because I know that is a big, big fight ahead as the industries continue to push very hard on all these different ways that communities are trying to have a voice and stand up against dirty fossil fuels. Next, we have Carletta Davis, who's joining us. Give me 1 second. She is awesome. And she's the president and executive director of We Matter 8 Mile Community Association. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so very excited to be here with you tonight and to bring from the front lines of a community who has been impacted by a fossil fuel company, and quite frankly is the very reason why we even exist, and to be here to talk about Project 2025 and really the scary thought of going back or going to where they're trying to take us with this initiative. So our organization was founded back in 2013 because we began to smell an odor that most people recognize as natural gas. What that odor is actually mercaptan, which is injected into natural gas. And once we started to be inundated with that odor, our children began to get sick. My children began to have issues like nosebleeds and respiratory illnesses. They began to have headaches and dizziness. And I was literally told by my children's pediatrician to get them out of our community, of which we are third, fourth generation there in the city of Pritchard in Alabama. So we left for a while and came back to the fight. And quite frankly, it has been a fight from that point to this one. If it has not been the lack of investment in our communities, it's been lack of regulation. And so to talk about a plan to remove what little protections we already have as EJ communities is, as I said earlier, just very frightening. And, you know, we have had in our state, with our environmental protection agency, very little oversight on these companies and on these violators from the beginning. And as we all know, our communities don't have the political clout in these states. And so for them to talk about putting the power back into the hands of the state to regulate environmental issues is just wrong. And our only recourse was that we had the federal agencies to fall back on and the federal law. And I often remind federal agencies when I speak with them about our community and the plight that we're in, is that it was not until federal law was changed that the civil rights movement actually really took hold. You know, there were laws on the books, but they were not being enforced. And it took federal intervention. And so it is just a dire situation. We personally, our organization at this time, we are taking the bull by its horns. We're so grateful to the Biden administration to have the foresight to see that, you know, with all of this money that's coming down through the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the IRA, that communities of color who have historically been disinvested in needed to have a direct investment. And so for Justice 40 to go away and communities of color not to see the benefit of trillions of dollars that are coming down, that quite frankly are our tax dollars, is just not right. And so we are standing in the fight. We are truly a frontline community. And I like to tell people all the time, I'm an environmentalist by force and not by choice. I'm a banker by trade. And it was not until my children began to get ill, and I still don't know the effects of what is going to be long term of them being exposed to this chemical, that I didn't get into the fight. I didn't think about who were the people pulling permits and how many landfills did we have in our community, you know, and who's regulating. So these are the things that we must begin to wake our communities up and educate them on. Our goal now, we have 5 E's. That's empowerment, employment, education, economics, and I always forget the 5th one. But if you visit our website at www.wm-ca.org, which is We Matter Community Association, you can read all about our 5 E's. But our main one is education and empowerment. It's because our community has to know what's going on. So we're having an EJ Summit that is coming up. We've invited down the federal departments to talk about the investment that's coming down through Justice 40. And we're hopeful that we can get frontline communities like ourselves to come and learn about this and actually take advantage of the resources that are going to be available. And you can go to our website at Alabama Gulf Coast EJSummit.com and get more information on the summit. But we're happy to be involved in this conversation. And again, we understand what the ramifications are, as do many other communities across the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm really excited that you all are having that summit in Alabama. I hope that we can get some of these key leaders. And I want to bring in Betamia Coronel, who's a senior national organizer for climate justice at the Center for Popular Democracy. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. And also, if you have questions from all of these great panelists, please put them in the Q&A section. Ask them in the chat wherever you're at, and we'll gather those so we can answer those during the Q&A section. So thank you so much, Beta.
Thank you, Carrie. I'm so happy to be with everyone here tonight. So as Carrie mentioned, my name is Beta. I work at the Center for Popular Democracy, and we are one of the largest grassroots organizing networks in the country, working with 51 affiliates in 34 states, including Puerto Rico and DC. And some of our amazing affiliating organizations that are part of our network include ACE in California, Step Up Louisiana, New Georgia Project, Make the Road Nevada, Pennsylvania, New York, Texas Organizing Project. So really, we're a network that spreads from coast to coast, including Alaska. And we are a power building network. We're a network of powerful grassroots organizations that really center base building and running powerful campaigns using direct action on issues that directly impact Black, Latina, immigrant, working class, and low-income communities across the country. Our organization is a multi-issue organization, so we run these powerful campaigns on issues such as voting rights and democracy, healthcare, housing, education, economic justice, and climate justice, just to name a few. So again, I'm really super happy to be here today representing and to speak a little bit about both the work that we're doing within CPD and with our network right now in the fight for climate justice, and discuss what are the implications for a second Trump presidency and Project 2025. So just to give you all a little bit of a inside of what are the kinds of campaigns that our network is currently working on. So again, our affiliates organize with communities that are at the front line of climate impacts and the intersection of other bread and butter issues that we know our community is facing, from forced migration and displacement after every climate impact, every superstorm, every freak ice storm that rolls through, these deadly tornadoes that we're seeing happen with more frequency and more powerful. So our affiliates are first on the front lines every time these disasters happen. And we know that our communities are not single issue communities, right? We know that the climate crisis is a threat multiplier to crises that our communities are already facing, with not having enough access to affordable housing, healthcare, and gaps in our education system, all of that. So one of the campaigns we've really been developing over the last year is all about IRA implementation, particularly at this intersection, right, of these multi-issues that our affiliates organize around. So one, we see a huge opportunity that the Biden administration has given our communities to really serve as proof of concept projects that show us what is possible in our community using money and funding to begin to transition entire neighborhoods off of fossil fuels. So we're running some zonal decarbonization campaigns where we're really focusing on transitioning housing stock off of gas lines, prioritizing Black and Brown low-income Latinx communities first. And we know that some of those provisions were written directly into the IRA when we fought to get it passed. Other types of IRA implementation campaigns that we're exploring with our affiliates is related to schools, children. We already seeing like massive within this threats of cuts within this administration, and we know that transitioning public buildings, of which schools are a huge stock of, can really benefit both in creating safer, cleaner air, safer environments for our children to learn in, and can potentially even serve as places for refuge when climate disasters do hit, right? Making schools cooling centers during massive heat waves, or places for post-disaster relief locations for post-disaster relief. So a group for schools is that we are continuing to fight for, and we see again IRA implementation being a huge piece of that. We also know that the IRA has fallen short in many ways, and while it's a historic step forward, there's also lots of gaps. That's why also at the federal level, we are engaged and leading on the climate emergency campaign that is really asking the administration currently to confront the industry that is responsible for the climate crisis, confront the fossil fuel industry. And again, we see we're really trying to have this lift up the ways in which climate impacts that we're seeing today, are an indicator for needing to transition and phase out of fossil fuels as fast as possible. Just last week, we had an action in Nevada where we really tried to lift up the connection between worker justice and the climate emergency. Only this past week, 48 people in Mexico lost their lives from this massive heat wave that's been rolling through Mexico. And construction workers, day laborers, postal workers who have to, all other workers that need to work outside, their lives are in danger every time there's a massive heat wave. So we're really bridging these issue areas together to call on the administration to act immediately and declare a climate emergency and confront the crisis head on and the industry head on. And in terms of Project 2025 and the threat that it looms over our community, definitely we cannot afford to roll back the IRA, right? We're only just beginning to see that money begin to reach our community, create opportunities of co-governance in places where our community has already worked really hard to get local elected officials to be champions of the just transition. And oftentimes, the question we get is like, well, we don't have the money to do that. If the IRA, which is kind of the first step in working towards a just transition, and that gets taken away, I mean, that is a huge step backwards for our community in being able to really feel what it is like when the federal government invests in protecting and ensuring that our communities are prioritized and not left behind in the climate crisis. And I think, overall, it feels like the Trump era, the first Trump era, was really long ago. And yet, I don't forget that Trump had Rex Tillerson, who was the former CEO of Exxon, serve on his cabinet. So I think that there is a huge, and I think last week we saw that he was directly asking oil executives for $1 billion in campaign contributions in order to defeat Democrats in this coming election. So there is a deepening of the entrenchment and between the right and the fossil fuel industry. And I think that those threats are really scary. So I'm trying to tap in as much as as I don't want to tap into some of the like what is at stake, and that fear of having folks that are hell bent on making a profit off of death and destruction and being a death cult, and doing whatever it takes to stop that from happening. So thank you again, Carrie, and thank you to all the other panelists.
Ooh, thank you so much. And you just touched on so many crucial and critical points. And also, it touches into this question that Queenie Murray has placed in the chat as well. And that's just perfect timing as we segue into Reverend Lennox Yearwood, who's been a champion on the ground in communities with voter engagement and also around climate justice. So thank you so much for joining us in this conversation.
It's great to be here. So good to see you, Carrie. You look fantastic. HU, I knew you would say
You know? I turned off my camera before.
I know.
Already. I dig it.
I figured but you hit the camera. But it's so good to see you. And so good to have this conversation. I believe that the future you see is the future you get. And so I think that what we're seeing here is two sides. We're seeing one side, Project 2025, that has laid out a future that is steeped in the history from Brown v. Board of Education for the past 70 years of not wanting to be in community, particularly with Black, Brown, Indigenous, and queer people. And we see that, and they've done everything they can, recognizing that they have been shaped by policy. And they realize that either you shape policy or policy shapes you. And so they've joined together in this unholy alliance with Christian nationalists, the Heritage Foundation, and many others around white supremacy. But the problem is that their business plan means a death sentence for our communities. And so it's not a game. It's this very serious matter. So I really wanted to kind of just build from two standpoints. One, I wear two different hats. As Carrie mentioned, I'm very proud to be a part of the Hip Hop Caucus, which is now a growing, powerful organization that is doing things around storytelling and demonstration, working with Dream Hampton, who's creating just some phenomenal films and documentaries with like Wanda Sykes. And that's just a key thing, because I believe that creation is important for demonstration. It's the new form. But I also feel, in the words of Tony K. Bombard, the role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. So shout out Hip Hop Caucus. Obviously, you can go. I just want to get to some of my points, but you can go to hiphopcaucus.org to see all the good work they're doing there. I also wear the hat now for the past 5 years of being a donor advisor and a funder. I'm actually have one of the largest environmental justice funds in a private form in the world. Obviously, I am doing the Beyond Carbon and Beyond Petrochemical campaign for Bloomberg, which one of those campaigns is $500 million to be distributed over 3 years. And I'm very proud to be someone from the front line and from Festline, from Cancer Alley myself, to be a part of helping to move that to particularly what I believe is how we win, is a strong Black, matriarchal, young people, frontline, fence line, environmental justice movement. I think that's what I'm hoping. But I want to stay there because I think that's where I think we need to go. The thing that we need to ask ourselves in this conversation is, why don't we have our own Project 2025? Why are we waiting? Why are we responding? How come we are in this position that we're in 5 months before the election, on the day when the former president was convicted of 34 felonies, and still wants to run, calling himself a political prisoner, saying that election day would be the true verdict? Why are we in this position now when we're organizing and mobilizing our people at the last minute? And I think that goes into what I believe that there is a problem within our own movement. What I said, we don't have our own Project 2025. We need to establish that. What does that look like? I mean, we have it, but how do we pull it together? What are our priorities as a movement, as we're fighting for humanity? I think the next thing there that's important is that as a movement, kind of like a marriage, if you're married to your partner, whoever you're married to, is that if you do good in your marriage, you won't need to get divorced. And I think too many times in this process, we feel that in our movement that it's not well. And what I mean by that is this: we give out $1 billion a year between 20 foundations for climate advocacy. Out of that $1 billion that's given out every single year, which should be put toward a probably 25, out of that $1 billion, only 1.3% of the $1 billion goes to BIPOC, EJ-led organizations. So there you go. That's one of the biggest problems, because obviously we're not actually funding groups on the ground, and they're struggling themselves. They're fighting against Formosa, they're fighting against Exxon, they're fighting in Oakland, Detroit, around. There's a problem. The next thing that I think is that we have a siloed movement. So even when we try to do a Project 25, everybody has their own agenda. We can't coordinate. So there are those who rightfully start working on many issues, but this is a key issue that we need to bring together. The last thing I want to say to this is that we do need to broaden this movement in great ways. I do think with Project 25 that one thing that we saw is that it's steeped around Donald Trump and his character and how he moves things forward and how he looks to dismantle. But what's interesting is this, is that last year, when in East Palestine, Ohio, the train derailment of vinyl chloride, shout out to EPA for obviously dealing with that petrochemical. But when that train derailment happened, the first person to go there to actually launch his campaign at an environmental justice site a month later was Donald Trump. Now, he threw out MAGA hats, which wasn't helpful, but he launched his second presidential campaign as an environmental justice component. The thing there is that this administration, which we applaud for the IRA and for BIF and other things, did not show up to East Palestine, Ohio, until a month after the one-year anniversary, meaning that the president didn't show up. Why is that important for this conversation? Because the people who were there in Ohio were predominantly white, moderate, mostly we would say some MAGA Republicans, if you may say. But they didn't know they were in the environmental justice community. And we have the opportunity to break the backs of this Project 2025 by simply being human, by simply engaging with all Americans, stating simply that subsidy taxation for oil execs is out of order, saying that everyone deserves clean air and clean water, no matter who you are, Black, brown, white, yellow, male, female, straight, gay, theist, atheist, that you deserve the right to live as long as you can in this world. And if any oil company has a business plan to make that shorten, so you can't love your grandmother, love your father, have your children getting cancer, then all of us should be unified. If we do that, I will guarantee you they can put together probably 2025, 2026, and 2027. It will not matter if we are doing what we need to do for our own people in the movement. So let us not have the oppression Olympics. Let us not have the trauma porn of saying how we're dying because of this and that. But let us come together and mobilize, organize, and as a people in our movement in true fashions, moving resources and infrastructure to the front line and fence lines of this movement, and we will defeat any project that comes our way. Thank you so much, and all power.
All right, that was a word. That's what we needed. I know you see those hearts and all the love coming through for that. And that just is so key and critical, because you really wrapped that in and brought in so many critical conversations. And a shout out, I would be remiss if I didn't shout out some of the great people who are doing the work on the ground, especially fighting to stop these LNG exports, liquefied natural gas, these pipelines that are building out all across the country, and even these other new projects that we don't even understand. And so together, communities are fighting and pushing back. And one of the big arguments that I see in the chat is around a climate emergency and what that truly means and what it means to build voter awareness. Now, I know a lot of your groups on the ground have been doing work around this in some capacity. So what does that look like to inform, and this is open to anyone, but what does that look like? And what does that look like as we step into not only US policy, but also international conversations? How do we protect our credibility as we move so much and it could all change overnight?
Okay, if I could just follow, you actually answered that question. I didn't quite hit that part of it, which was that obviously, I think about Cox, we have the Respect My Vote campaign, as you know. And I do think that the electoral part is important to this. We're going to need to deal with that. I think we have to look at it also from a global perspective. Half the world is actually going to vote coming up very soon, and that's actually very important. I do think also as we're having the global conversations from COP, this will be COP 29, next will be COP 30 in Brazil. We have the INC plastic treaties that is going on, which is in Ottawa, will be coming up in Korea. And so I do think that what people are waiting for is the electoral process in America. It is that important. The world is literally waiting for that. So I do think that has to be a firm, just a commitment for our movement. What we're doing, obviously, is working in those traditional states, but we're also working in places that people don't work normally, such as in the Gulf. Obviously, I'm from the South, so obviously working in Alabama and Mississippi and Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas. And I think that we're doing that because it's an important place to work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And right on time, Carletta, you must have read my mind. You knew I was coming for you, and I see you, Beta, as well.
So I firmly, and I say this all the time, you're either fighting the problem or you feeding the problem. Okay. And so at this point, what our demand is you stand up and fight, or you sit down and go in the corner, right? Because for too long, the wrong voices have been the loudest voices in the rooms in our communities. And some of those voices look like us. And they have prevented us from moving forward and getting the protection and living the quality of life that we should be living. And so at this point, we have to fight it politically, but we also have to fight it with economics. And so that is why our community association is going after $20 million in order to do an economic development project in our community, so that when it's time for those climate crises that we know are going to come, that we actually have the resources to fight them. So, you know, we're in the fight, and what we're saying is that you either fight or you go and sit down. You no longer have the right to be the loudest voice in the room if you're not in this fight for us.
Folabi, I know you have to run. You always in the midst of the move. I see you.
Thank
so
you.
I want to get to you real quick. What are your thoughts around this, especially?
Yeah, with respect to how this project 2025 is going to impact US standing internationally, I think with voluntary agreements like the Paris Climate Agreement, not participating or even the threat of pulling out has already done the damage. Because, you know, that kind of framing really sends strong signals to the rest of the international community, particularly to important countries in this climate conversation like China and India and the EU. And I also think I'm sorry. I think I should mute myself often sometimes. But I think the question actually underestimates the significance of the damage that Project 25 will do. It will not just negatively impact US standing around the Paris Climate Agreement. It will actually destabilize the fledgling global international order. that we see is now really straining in terms of some of the failed policies that is happening. We've seen what is going on in Palestine, how the international community is just really powerless to do anything about it. We also know that you can't achieve a global cooperation to address climate change without a global order that other countries actually respect. I feel that a second Trump presidency will likely open the floodgates to other despots, to worst despots around the world. I mean, we are seeing a lot of this happening in East Europe, in other countries where people, white nationalist, sentiments is really growing, and they are just looking at the US and say, what is going on here? It's important to know that authoritarians don't care about climate change or anything than advancing their own power and just really keeping power and keeping others down, especially those who do not agree with. Check.
Thank you for that. Real quick, Beta, what's up? And I got you all are bringing in some deep questions over here. So yes, how you living?
Yeah, so I think that there is this false assumption that folks are often make in elected officials and other folks that people somehow do not connect the crises that we are watching unfold, whether it's heat waves that kill people on the job, or superstorms that wipe out entire communities, or wildfire smoke that last year. I'm from New York City, but I know that over like 150 million people in the country were affected by the wildfire smokes in Canada. And I think that there's a false assumption that somehow folks are not yet connecting those climate impacts to the fossil fuel industry. And that's just like not the case. Like when we run trainings and when we're on the doors, our network during election cycles, I learned only yesterday that we make over 11 million contacts through door knocking and phone calls, etc., during election seasons. And when we're talking to people on the ground, like there's definitely a connection that we're seeing. I think that's thanks to all of the work that the climate movement has done to really point its finger at who is the industry responsible for the suffering that we're seeing, and that there is a chance for President Biden to do something right now using his executive powers. He can really use a pen to reinstate the crude oil export ban today, and that would be a huge that would have a huge impact in just even his stance against the fossil fuel industry. So I think that, yeah, that's what I wanted to add. I think that that's a false narrative we should continue to uplift, that people are understanding who is to blame, and that we need people who are serious about taking action against this industry to act now.
Definitely. And thank you again to Folabi for joining us as he runs off to do another. We're zooming and time traveling. But real quick, I want to go into this, and I see you, Daniel, and I want to chime you in on this as well. You all are bringing up a key component when it means, what does it mean to go to the polls? And what are we getting people excited about? How are we explaining the things that are about to get lost if Project 2025? So can you all kind of guide into some of this? And also, what can people do beyond just voting?
Well, I can take a quick stab at this, and I want to pick up on some of the points that the Reverend made as well. But before we do that, I just want to point out, the Global Center for Climate Justice, we put out a federal funding primer, and it's a complete guide that's oriented to the grassroots and frontline organizations on how they can tap into the IRA Justice 40 and BIL money. And we think it's the most comprehensive guide, how-to guide. So that's available at climatejusticecenter.org. I think, the climate crisis in many ways may be too big for the EJ movement alone. It points to the necessity of building a larger multiracial, multi-class, multi-generational, if not multinational movement to take on the most powerful corporations in the world. And we see that manifest in Project 2025. And I think one of the key ways that we can begin to do that, and this goes to the heart of your question, Carrie, too, is if we can begin to adopt more of an intersectional perspective and apply it to how we do politics, I think it will help us to cross those geographic, racial, class divides that separate us and bring us in around a larger common agenda. So, for example, instead of taking single issue approach, one of the strengths of the EJ movement past is the way in which issues of environmental justice relate to affordable housing and just transportation and so forth. So showing how different issues are related to one another, I think is really key, so that the solution for one type of problem doesn't make another type of problem worse. But the other part of this is that, there's a lot of research showing that, for example, in the South and so forth, whenever rural whites have been convinced by the right to adopt a essentially racist agenda that is neoliberal at its heart, that's conservative, it actually results in a decline in their living standards. Meisel has a book called Dying to Whiteness, because it results in an attack on public education. It's presented as racist, but it also results in the deconstruction of those public institutions and services that serve working class whites. And climate change is obviously that. We all have an interest in this, as Beta mentioned. Last 2 years, 1/3 of the entire US population has lived in a county that experienced a climate-related disaster. But when it comes to voting, even though the majority of the American people consider themselves to be pro-climate, climate change takes a back seat to other issues. The number one issue in this campaign is inflation. So one of the challenges for us is to explain, well, inflation is related to this consolidation of corporate power and the way they're engaged in profit taking. It is related to the growing power of the fossil fuel industry and ever higher oil prices. And that what we're offering in the form of a Green New Deal and climate justice is to move us away from a dependency on these very, very expensive fossil fuels for cheaper sources of energy that don't have all the harmful effects associated with them. So if we can connect our issue to the issues that people put at the forefront, the ability to put food on their table, which has been compromised by inflation, then we can expand our base. So I think looking at these interconnections and devising, ways that we can educate the public and mobilize our own organizing strategies around a more intersectional perspective that can help build these bridges is really key. And I think that will help in exactly what Reverend Yearwood was saying we need to do.
Yeah, so chiming back over to you, Rev, because I know you have an extensive history. And when we first started out long time ago, you've been building these alliances across, boundaries, across conversations. And what key pieces would you chime in about that, and also about explaining some of these critical pieces like public commenting that's at stake when we look at things like the LNG pause that's happening, and communities like Rashida Ozanes and James Hyatt that are facing multiple infrastructure issues and multiple threats, and they're also very diverse. So what has been your experience connecting these conversations in diverse communities?
Yeah, no, thank you, Carrie. Yeah, no, we've been around for a minute and seen enough now to have a little bit of an idea of what works and what doesn't. You mentioned somebody who's amazing, Rashida Ozane. I think that Rashida is a good example of what our movement should look to utilize. I actually think sometimes the movement, and I believe in data and research, is critically important to have that, but I also believe that you need to have folks who are doing what they got to do in the front lines. And so Rashida is a good example because she, to me, is as close to a modern day Fannie Lou Hamer as we're going to get. Someone who can, just through her presence when she's echoes almost, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. So for instance, and just the bravery, someone who folks are not, who's from Louisiana, fighting not only just LNG in her own community, but on a number of things throughout the state. What works there is that even though Louisiana, as an example, is a vicious state that is doing horrible things. For instance, the phosphate industry is putting plants on former plantation sites, knowing how disgusting that is for our community. Shout out to the Banner sisters who just bought a plantation, knowing that they're literally digging up former enslaved burial ground. Shout out to the Levine family, Sharon Levine and Shamar Levine, the Levine family, for using that strategy to stop Formosa. Shout out to those who are educating our communities, like Dr. Wright and many, many others. And again, there's a theme here. You might notice that most of them are Black women, and they're on the front line. So again, I think one of the solutions is giving them the resources, funding the front lines of the movement. Because what happens there, that they are closely connected to the community they live in. And once you fund those communities, and people who those communities fund are then funding people within their own communities, you don't need to come in there on October to explain to them why your vote was important, or even why how the IRA should have worked, or how the BIF should have worked, or the CHIPS Act should have worked. You then have a connection. You build community. And so I do think that, again, this movement does not do a good job of building community. And that is what we're fighting against. If we do that, the elements of Project 2025 will seem laughable and ridiculous to the people who we're talking about. But with that being said, I do think that this election, again, is very important. We are dealing with a situation where there are other things happening in the world, from the Congo, Haiti, obviously Gaza. And so people are obviously trying to figure out how those things can happen. And so we do need to build those things into the conversation and have real talk. I do think that's important. I do think that political education is important. I do think getting onto college campuses, having seminars into communities. And again, I do think Hip Hop Caucus is now doing with their film Underwater Projects with Wanda Sykes, and Fresh Water that Dream Hampton did. I do think that we have to do better at our communication strategy. I think that we have a tendency to think that we can just use bullet points and one-pagers to win an argument, but we're not utilizing, which Carrie, you're awesome at this. We're not utilizing our ability to communicate. We're not using our ability to use our cultural expression to form our political experience. And because we're not doing that, we're losing on the barbershops and the beauty salons, who literally, I think, would be tremendous allies. So I think that we have some work to do. I am prayerful that we can escape 2024 without the madness that we are still approaching. Thank goodness we have those jurors are helping in one aspect. But I do think that we have to stop being a very usatory movement in which we are only concerned about Black, brown, and indigenous bodies when they are literally dying, choking, and spitting up blood. That is not a movement. I don't need to hear about the death of my people to move to action. I want us to move from a place where we're talking about Cancer Alley to Opportunity Alley. We need to have a different conversation. And I do think that we're talking about liberation of our people. That will motivate people more than anything to get out there, because they understand what they're fighting for. It is our freedom and our livelihoods to live.
Yeah, ashe. Okay. All right. Well, listen, I don't know if you knew that you was going to get a word today, but you've gotten several words today. We need to move from Cancer Alley to Opportunity Alley. Write that down, quote it out right there. And on that, I really want to take a moment to talk with Carletta, because you are in the belly of the beast. You are in the Deep South in Alabama. So for your organization, what support is needed on the ground as we're talking about not only building up strength for community empowerment, but also what's to come if something were to happen, if we have to look at all scenarios?
Well, I think Reverend hit it right on the head. We have to move from surviving to thriving. And to do that, we have to have resources. I believe that every issue that we see in our community is rooted in economic depravity. And so if we don't have the resources to answer the call, then we're going to continue to be in this vicious cycle. And so our organization is reaching out. We don't need allies, we need accomplices. Okay. And what we're doing is we're standing up and we're saying we're here and we're not going to take it anymore. And at this point, it doesn't matter if you're $1 billion company, $1 trillion company, or if you're Donald Trump. We're going to stand toe to toe with you, 10 toes down, and we're going to say enough is enough. And we need the resources in order to put our words into actions. We have a plan. And one of the things that we're strongly advocating for is that communities like us have a plan. I agree with Reverend again, that why don't we have our own 2025 plan? Right? We should have a plan of action for how we're going to move our communities forward and stop just surviving. We must thrive.
Totally agreed. Totally agreed. And I do want to take a moment and kind of get an idea. I don't know if there's any live questions that people might have in the chat. We're going to open that up real quick and get some closing thoughts as we think about this, especially with this moment that we're in, which is super critical, that we have a convicted felon that's running for president, and a whole strategy that is affiliated with an agenda that he may also be connected with, but we don't know. So are there any other additional questions that people might have before we go into, let's see. All right. Let's see. All right. So while we're segueing out, real quick, are there key things that you want people to know? How do they get involved? I'm going to pass it to you, Beta, because I know you just came back with us. So what are some ways that people can get involved with CPD, Center for Popular Democracy, and the work that you all are doing to move and protect us from Project 2025?
Yeah, for sure. So I think I dropped in the chat. We've been gathering petition signatures from everyone everywhere, asking directly Joe Biden to declare a climate emergency. Last year, we were part of the leadership crew of folks who planned the end fossil fuels march in New York City that ended up having 75,000 people out in the streets in New York right around the September meetings at the UN. So we're constantly taking action. If you sign the link if you follow the link that I dropped, and I can drop it again in the chat, you'll be able to send a message directly to Ali Zaidi, who is President Biden's right hand on climate policy. And we're sending him, literally, you fill that out and it'll be as if you send an email to Ali Zaidi, asking him to do his part to push his boss, President Biden, to declare a climate emergency. By signing that and sending that email, you'll also get on our list. We're constantly having, we run a leadership development program called the Climate Defenders Academy, where you can really get to do some deep study of the connections between how the climate crisis is rooted in our country's history of slavery, of industrialization, of right, the like original sins of our country in the extraction of human labor and the extraction of natural resources from the earth, all the way to how that is impacting our communities today. So the Climate Defenders Academy is a really awesome way to get connected with other folks who also want to do some deep study and get called into action, get connected to one of our affiliate organizations on the ground who have been in this fight for a long time and will continue to lead us in the fights ahead. So those are a few things you can do. Thanks so much, Carrie.
Thank you. Thank you. I see Carletta, you dropped it in the chat. Join us at our summit. Yes.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So again, there is power in collaboration. There is power in organizing. There is power in knowledge. And that's what we're doing at this summit. So please visit our website at algulfcoastejsummit.com to get more information and to register June 24th through the 26th.
Awesome. Right there. Okay, it's coming soon. I see you, Daniel.
So just a real quick, a couple of other things. One is going back to the earlier conversation. It's very easy for people to retreat in the face of the magnitude of the climate crisis and all its associated injustices, for people to withdraw and feel a sense of being overwhelmed and dismayed. So I think one of the challenges that we face is how can we use the climate crisis as a catalyst for constructing a vision about how we can remake society and remake society perhaps into the best society the world has ever seen. So how can climate change serve as that catalyst? So if we create a vision of such a world that can inspire people to become part of the movement rather than to retreat in fear, I think that's one of our primary challenges. A lot of the messaging you see in movement circles is about all the harm that's being done, and that's very, very important. But if we don't leave people with that vision, then it's very easy for those to withdraw. And so for that reason, for example, at the Global Center for Climate Justice, we help write some of the Green New Deal programs for various cities. And there's a really fast growing Green New Deal network. And Green New Deal politics is one manifestation of trying to create this model, this vision that people can see how it can actually result in improvement in their lives, in their daily lives in very tangible ways. And I think so this is a challenge for the EJ movement, the climate justice movement as well. And telling those success stories are very, very important, as much as presenting analysis of some of the harm that may be coming our way. There is a growing effort in parts of the movement right now, Center for Popular Democracy, the Green Democracy Table. We are putting out a report as well on the threat to American democracy posed by this new mobilization of the right. So we're beginning to see different elements of the environmental justice, environmental climate change movements come together and talk about how can we work with other movements to protect and restore and expand American democracy. No social movement in this country is going to win on any of their issues if the right takes over the state and systematically dismantles the federal government. No one is going to win. So we, in many ways, have to come together at this particular moment and really prioritize the necessity of a broad-based, multi-issue, multi-movement, pro-democracy movement so that we can all continue to win going into the future. So we're beginning to see that happening. And I think distributing resources to grassroots organizations and forming this emergency response network should be a priority over the summer. So we're prepared to hit the ground running in the fall.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And I see you got some folk dropping gems in the chat. Thank you very much. Rev, I know y'all got so much going on. It's going to be a summer of heat. It's going to be a summer of lots of things going on. How can people get engaged?
Yeah, I would say one, definitely go to hiphopcaucus.org. That's the easy way. We'll be doing a number of things for the election with our Respect My Vote campaign. One of our key moments is going to be at Essence this year. We have a lot of things coming, so we'd love for folks to join us down in New Orleans for Essence. We'll be showing Underwater Projects, the new film with Wanda Sykes, as well as having a number of panels and conversations around how we can stop petrochemicals and what we can do to mobilize our community. But I just want to end with this. You know, I want to say that Project 2025 is not new for Black people. We've had that since the beginning. Since we've come to this country. There's always been a semblance of a kind of Project 2025. What's different, we can now see it more clearly. But when we have been fighting for years against legislation or litigation that's been against our communities, saying that we're not human, we're 3/5, or we can't live here, or there's been redlining, or there's been highways built through our communities. There's been poverty. There's obviously, we know 68% of coal-fired power plants are within 30 miles of Black communities. So we know that there's been a lot of things that have been done in boardrooms. What's different now, I think, is that white supremacy, on some cases, is on the run, and they are more desperate now, and so they're more suicidal, and so unfortunately, they don't care that what they're doing to us and the planet not only will kill us, which was always a mentality to kill Black bodies and brown bodies, but now they're willing to kill their own. That's a different dynamic. They're literally willing to suicide the Rockefeller type children, or the Exxon children, or the Shell children. They're descendants, or the Trump children. They're now willing to put them on the Titanic. So this is different. We're now facing a different type of beast, an enemy that is willing not only to kill us, we've seen for generations, but to kill their own. And so we have to be very serious. It's not a game. We have to organize like we've never organized before. And I do believe that one thing that will help us will be our political education, will be our faith, and will be our love for one another. And that means that we need to share resources. That means that we can't have 10 climate organizations all with $100 million a year budget doing the exact same thing, while we have frontline groups trying to work off of 200,000 or one. I may be getting too tight right now, but this is the end of the conversation. So $1 million budget that they're trying to make it happen, that Rosetta can't get a babysitter for her kids to go to rallies, but we have her speaking at the rallies, but then we can't support her to get back and forth, taking her kids. So I think that we have to change some things as a movement. I know that we can do it. I was asked this by a young person a long time ago in New York. I was speaking. A young person came to me. He said, "Rev, I love what you said on environmental justice, but I have to ask you a question. Why do you want to save hell so bad?" And for many Black, brown, and indigenous people, they don't see this as environmental justice. They see this as saving hell. And so I think that we have to figure out a new language so that we ain't trying to save hell, obviously, but that we can save hope. Let this be an opportunity for us to move forward as a new movement that loves one another, respects one another, and actually works together, not in a vertical, but in a way that brings all together. And if we do that again, we will not, it won't matter what they write, 25, 26, 27, or even they get to 30. It won't matter, because organized people beats organized money every single time. Thanks, Karen.
Again. Say that again. All right. Organized people beats organized money every single time. And I'm so thankful for this panel and for what's to come on this continued conversation. Again, my name is Carrie Fulton. I'm the Senior Organizing Director with the amazing new initiative called the Center for Oil and Gas Organizing. And we're doing exactly what Daniel said. We're bringing together the fishermen. We're bringing together the people that live in the hood. We're bringing together the people that are engineers. We're bringing together the laborers. We're bringing together everybody so that Frontlines can speak. And I think that's key. So you can follow us at centerfororganizing.org or online on all platforms at Frontlines Speak. And I really want to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors for this critical conversation, and it's just the start of many. Thank you to Chromatic Black. Thank you for Center for Popular Democracy. Thank you to Global Center for Climate Justice. And I want to pass it over to our fearless leader, Abeni Bloodworth, who is going to follow us up and take us on out of here. Thank you so much, y'all.
So, I'm curious about what your key takeaways are for a person that's in the space. Tell me what you learned new. Tell me where you've been inspired. And tell me what you think we should be focusing on over the next 6 months before November 6th.
Oh my gosh, I was so inspired by everything that I just heard. First of all, there are so many key overlaps that are happening across communities, but the most key and important part was the frontline conversation and what that means to support communities on the ground, and what that conversation looks like, as Daniel was talking about, to bring together communities from across different sectors that may not necessarily come at it from a climate perspective. And I think as we dive deeper into Project 2025, which is a huge platform, I mean, over 900 pages, it's almost 1,000 pages long, right? We're going to have to start thinking about these local strategies so that we can build localized power. So every time that we build these movements, we're not just building this moment, but as Reverend Yearwood said, we're actually putting in some strength so that we're empowering our front lines for the fight ahead. And so the local power is going to be key. And also, I'm just so excited that we have people, regardless of whether it's 5 months or if it's 10 months, we know that there are people on the ground and they're ready. And we're going to be pushing back and fighting back. And, hey, what a day to talk about it and proclaim that good news, especially when we've also heard some other good news. So what did you think? What were your thoughts? Yeah.
Oh my God, I got so many notes. I think thriving, surviving to thriving. I think we need to have Reverend Yearwood, come and do a Sunday sermon. We could do church service. I want to thank Daniel, just the commitment and the breadth, and the Center for Popular Democracy, extending the resources and I used to work for Center for Popular Democracy, and so all those Black and brown folks at the front lines that are working on this issue every single day, and I think I walked away with why do we want to save this democracy, which has been a question. And I think we not only want to save it for us, but if we save it for us, we're also saving the world, right? So those are some of my key takeaways from tonight. Again, I want to remind those that are here, please come back in September to join us again as we continue to unpack this issue. I want to thank every single one of our folks from the Center for Popular Democracy, Global Center for Climate Justice, the Center for Oil and Gas Organizing, the Hip Hop Caucus, We Matter 8 Mile Community Association, and Greenpeace. What you don't see is that for the last 2 months, all of the work that's gone on behind the scene to be able to bring this town hall to you. And I'm being reminded, please register for the next Climate Justice Town Hall. Please register and let's go spend some time with Carletta in Alabama, June 24th, and I think 25th. I'd encourage everyone to also please support the work that's happening on the ground in Alabama. Also pick up your virtual swag bag. I think Memory's gonna drop another link. If you'd like to join us for upcoming panels or serve as a speaker, please drop us a note. And again, thanks everyone for your genius and your bravery. I think I heard that word, your bravery, as we win together.